to give a little report on the school board workshops or meetings. I usually go to the workshops now. But tonight, since our main event is school board, I'm going to dispense with that. The one thing I will tell you is that I've been going to these meetings for a long time now, and the energy in the room has greatly improved, and I am really excited to introduce to you our new school board superintendent, Diane Kornegay.
I'll get you the mic. Just find a way in.
So good evening.
Good evening.
I've gotten to know a number of you in this room, so I kind of feel as though I'm among friends tonight. And I'm honored to be here with you, and just to talk a little bit more. Some of you were with me on Monday. Is that Monday evening or Tuesday evening? And so I'm going to change the message a little bit, so you'll keep hearing the same things. But it's something that I think that kind of a next step in this conversation. And so I talked more about the other evening about myself and my goals, and so I'll kind of briefly touch on those. But before we get started, we gave you an assignment. I think you met maybe Emily Weisskopf when you came in the door, and she is my number 2, my sidekick, and she has been taken on the title of Chief of Transformation. So I'll explain why that is. So when she and I started thinking about this district and what we wanted to accomplish, we kept coming back to, we're going to transform teaching and learning. And that word transform just kind of stuck in our minds. So I said, until all that work is done, you're going to be the Chief of Transformation. When we're done transforming and we're on the right road, we could change the title. But so that is her title. And so I'm glad that she's here with me tonight. She gave you a sticky note and a pen if you didn't have one when you came in the door. So I want you to take one sticky note. And on the first one, I want you to write the one word that comes into your mind when you think of Lake County schools. It's that one word that pops into your head. I want you to write that on one sticky note. Let's do that, and I'll tell you what you're going to write on the second sticky note.
I would just like to tell everybody, if you're having trouble writing with this pen, there's a little rubber tip on the end that you need to take off. Just in case they say it.
That's important. I've done that. And when you're done with that, on the second sticky note you have, I want you to think about what is your recommended next step for me as the superintendent to improve our schools. What would you like to recommend to me that we could do to improve our schools?
That you have ability to do, or our grand wish list?
I think what is it that we need to do to improve our schools? What would that recommendation be? And I'm really glad tonight to have some student voices in the room to hear what you guys have to say.
Free donuts.
And when you're done, Emily's going to collect those. She's going to kind of sort them for us, and we'll talk about those later.
Mind stating the first question, and I can just have it.
First question is, what's the one word that comes into your mind when you think about Lake County schools? One word.
It's good, right?
I'm not.
Of course it's good.
This is all anonymous.
Unless you can read our handwriting.
Video and everything.
Yeah.
Can we submit more than one?
doing that, and Emily's picking them up, I did just want to touch on, if you didn't hear me speak the other night, a little bit about what my initial goals are. I did come with a 100-day plan. And so just to kind of summarize, one of the first things I said that I was going to do is to build relationships and trust with our school board, with our community, with our teachers, our staff, our leaders, with our business community. And I'm going to do that through collaboration and conversations. And so this is one of those. I call them the listen and learn. I've tried not to talk a whole lot, but rather to listen to you as a community, to give me input. So that's why I'm collecting some of your input this evening, and I'll ask you a few other questions in a few minutes. The other thing that I am doing is I'm evaluating every dollar and how it's being spent, looking at every contract that we have in this district, looking for duplications of services, looking for ways to eliminate cost, and to take all of the money that we can, save, and put it back into our classrooms for our kids. And that was one of the goals that I had. One of the things that I have to make sure is that every teacher has the resources and support that he or she needs to make sure that every child has the support that he or she needs. I'm also evaluating every program. So we're talking about instructional practices, looking at the curriculum, what instructional methods are being used in the classrooms. I've walked every single school. I've been in about 230 classrooms so far. At one school I didn't get to that I'll be in tomorrow. So by tomorrow we'll have been in every one of our schools, including our conversion charter schools, as well as our academy schools, the Lee Academy and Lake Tech. And also met with all of our post-secondary institutions within the county. So we're going to make sure that we have the academic supports that every child needs to meet their individual needs, as well as their social and emotional needs as well. And then I'm also looking at our operations and facilities to make sure that we have very safe and orderly schools. And so a lot of goals have been accomplished in that area as well. So as of today, I'm on day 57 of this job. So keep that in mind. I feel like I've been here a long time. And I feel just because of the outpouring of support and just truly just a caring community that I've never experienced before, I feel like I'm already such a part of this community, and I thank you for that. So my ultimate goal, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is to move Lake County Schools into a top-performing school district in the state of Florida, making sure that every child has what he or she needs to graduate, ready for college or a career. But I can't do that alone, and our schools can't do it alone. And I know from what I've learned in my 57 days is that we don't have to. It's because I know that you're here because you care about kids, and you want to improve our schools and make sure that that goal is achieved. So I thank you for that. And what Lori mentioned about the Senate bill in regards to testing, thank you, because this county was, and I told her this the other day, has been a very loud voice, but a very positive and proactive voice in how they've handled that. You know, all across the state, we've seen all groups of people coming together, rallying against the over-testing and the overburden of our kids in our schools. And what you've done here, and the way that you've handled that, has taken notice, and it has made a change. And so I thank you all for that, and I know Lori and others really have been the leaders of that initiative and have been people who have heard you. And so I'm excited about what's coming out of this session. I had a chance to be in Tallahassee about 2 weeks ago. I sat with Senator Mumford and we went through this bill. And I talked about the things that are in there. But just the idea that they're willing to eliminate this bill passes, even with the amendments now, because they're merging some of the bills together to eliminate the course exams for our high schools, or the duplication of tests with those hopefully are going to go away. They're looking at the SAT and ACT as alternatives to get rid of the state tests that the students have to take in grade 10. So it's just, and then a big one for me is, if you haven't heard about VAM, it's called Value Added Model. They're taking the test score and they're then attaching it back to a teacher and a principal's evaluation, and their pay is based on that. So you think about that, a child takes a test 1, 2, 3, 4 days over the course of a year, and a teacher's pay is based upon the performance of those kids and their ability to move those kids. It's a very unfair and inequitable system. They're calling this performance pay. There's no research to say that it's effective or that improves student achievement. And if this bill passes with the amendments that it has, that would be eliminated. And for me, that is so tremendously exciting because it is really, we talk about teacher morale, it has really caused a lot of people to leave the profession because it is just unfair. So again, thank you, and I'm excited about what's happening right now. Right now, we probably won't see a lot of money this year. But if we could get this language, I think it's a win. It's a win for our schools, a win for our teachers and our kids. So we're going to keep praying that all goes well with that. But I say all that again as evidence of what we as a community are doing for our kids, and knowing that I don't have to do this alone. So I'm just going to have some conversation tonight. Emily's going to collect your thoughts on those initial things that we just talked about. But I want to know what you all feel. Now, right now, we're in the bottom third of the state in academic performance, and I'm going to share some of our data with you, if that's okay. I think it's important that you see that, and that we have some conversation as a community about where we are and where we can go. So I'm going to give you, if somebody can help. That's my Vanna.
Okay.
Take a look at this. There's two sides to it. So the first side that I want you to look at, it says, what does our data tell us? We look at that side first and just take a minute and see if there's anything that kind of stands out in terms of areas of concern or areas of strength. And I'll tell you a little bit about what you're looking at. Regardless of what happens after this legislative session, in terms of the changes to our accountability system, we'll always have a measure, the state will always have a measure to which we're held accountable for. So what you're looking at on the front side of that is our current accountability measure. So it looks at English, that's English language arts, that's a combination of a reading and writing test that the kids take in grades 3 through 10. And it's proficiency. So it's a 5-level scale, levels 1 through 5, and a child to be proficient on this scale, they have to score a level 3 or higher. Okay, so we have, in Lake County, we have 50% of our students in grades 3 through 10 scoring proficient on the state assessment. Okay? The next column that we're accountable for is learning gains. So the expectation is that every child, regardless of whether they score at a level 1 in the previous year to the current year, has to show a gain. So if I score a level 1 and I don't count for proficiency, but I improve enough according to what the state says is a year's worth of improvement, then I get counted as a learning gain. So you think about the child who might be sitting in a 4th grade classroom who's way behind. They're that struggling learner. So they might be at a 1st grade reading level. They're probably not going to score proficient on the state exam because that reading test is going to be on a 4th grade level. They don't read at that level. But if that teacher can move them from a low level 1 to a level 2, that's a learning gain. Or a low level 1 to a high level 1, that's a learning gain. So that's where there is, I like that part. I like that we're focusing on growth of kids rather than this idea of proficiency. I like the growth column. I don't care much for the proficiency column because I think in a lot of cases it's unrealistic. So they do the same thing for math, and this math is grades 3 through 8. So you see the scores there. And then you have science in grades 5 and 8 and biology, which is their high school science course. And then you see the social studies there, which is U.S. history and 7th grade civics. The acceleration points are points that you get for every child that's enrolled at this is the middle grades. So a child that takes an advanced placement course in middle school, or they take an industry certification, that's one of those career technical education programs, they get points for that. And then our graduation rates, and then our college and career acceleration, that's the high school, same as the middle school, but it's at the high school level. So kids that take advanced placement courses and pass an AP exam get counted there. They take an industry certification exam with a career and technical education program, they get counted there. That's what those columns represent. Is there anything that kind of jumps out at you as you look at where we are. Keep in mind, they're just getting ready to take this year's test, so this is last year's data.
We have a higher graduation rate,
Way higher.
but we're not real smart. I mean, that's what it shows.
Well, I don't know about smart, but we're not
Proficient.
We're not good at taking tests.
We don't read very well.
Maybe the tests are bad.
I think so.
That could be too.
See a
That's what a
correlation
Democrat
with
would
the
say.
Common Core stuff, the
They're the
math
ones that
and
caused it.
ELA compared to the history and the science. And then as we move up into the dumbing down of the children, not getting to that college and career ready state that they are promising them it's going to do. That's what I see.
And this compares, this is the state of Florida. This is not national.
That's correct.
And we rank in national standards as number what?
On the date, which is the national assessment, it is bad. I don't know exactly where we fall on the date, but in relation to the state of Florida, we rank 44th out of the 67 school districts.
Right. But if the state of Florida is ranked in the lower 50 percentile, which I think it is, of national standing, and then our kids are in lower than 50% of the state standing, I don't think we're doing our kids justice in our school systems. We're just not.
Well,
Keep that in mind, because that's where my question is going to go in just a minute, about how we're going to fix that.
okay. You just get the answers. You got the answers, so I won't ask anymore.
I'm hoping you have the answers. I want some answers.
Well, to me, it seems like just having sat in board meetings for like 10 years, and all the different standards, all the different tests, and all the different programs, that they're putting too much on both the teachers and the students, and that they, well, let's add this, let's make, they haven't added clock making, but, just about everything else, and so I would think that they apparently don't have time to learn, or the teachers don't have time to teach them to learn some, even half the content. Is probably the way I look at it. And so you have the answer?
Well, I think you identified one of the problems is time. And our instructional time is certainly taken up with a lot of testing, but that's part of the problem.
The standards have more in it than people can learn, and or it's not developmentally appropriate.
Yes.
The thing I hear from my children who go to school in an adjoining county is that disruption in the classroom ends up consuming about 50% of the classroom time. And it's from the time the bell rings, it takes 10 or 15 minutes for them to get on task, and disruptions during the course of the teaching session, leave them with about 20 minutes of instructional time during the course, as does my ex-wife, who's a school teacher in Orange County. The same report. Well, we don't slap them around anymore.
I know.
In my case, when I went to school, I got A's in art, I got A's in science, history, and it seemed like you get an essay of a child that gets A's in these classes, in these subjects, and then find out what is real interesting to make other math, biology, and all that, make it interesting for him in a certain way that he can excel at that. Because you can excel in certain subjects, but he's failing in others. I hope I totally didn't confuse you.
No, you just said something that makes a whole lot of sense. And something that, if we go back and we look at the college and career acceleration points, and we start thinking about exactly what you said, that is the key for these kids graduating, improving their reading scores, scores and the math scores, that we can find what it is that most interests them and engage them in learning around those things. So that's really the idea of the whole career and technical education programs. It used to be called vocational ed. But finding those job skills that we can give those students so that they can, not all these kids, if we think about these kids that are not showing learning gains, they're not reading at grade level, there's a lot we can do to work on that and get them to proficiency. But there are some kids who are just not going to be college bound. And so one of the things that we've done really well, if you look at the middle grades acceleration, we're doing really well in that area, because one of the things that this county's done very proactively is that they put some career and technical education programs into our middle schools so that kids can earn industry certifications in grades 8 before they enter high school. And so if you look at that 67% and you look at that across all of the districts in the state of Florida, Lake County is one of the top in that area, doing really well. So we have kids taking digital design certifications, Microsoft certifications, and they're leaving middle school with those. So they already have developed an interest in the skill as they enter the high school. Where we're not doing really well is making sure that we grow those opportunities at our high school, and that's reflected in that 41% in that acceleration. So one of the things that today, as a matter of fact, I met with our economic development group with Robert Chandler and his staff, and we talked about how we're going to bring the business community in to help move into our schools, be a part of our business advisory groups, grow our career and technical education programs so that every child, as you just said, has a chance to learn in a field that they're interested in. It doesn't mean that that's what they're locked into. Is that if I decide that I want to be an auto mechanic and I get into an academy or a program specific to that when I graduate, that's what I'm going to do. It's developing an interest. I might be a lot more interested in reading an auto mechanic's manual than I am in reading a novel. So that's how we engage kids, and we know we have seen great evidence that we can improve our graduation rates by exposing kids to those types of things that you just mentioned. And so that is just, it's a passion of mine because I see the benefits for kids, and I'm really excited about what we can do as a community with our business community coming alongside of us. And so one of the things that I proposed to the board about a week or so ago is redesigning our district office and taking a regional approach by kind of clustering it, because it's big. So rather than having one person who oversees all the evaluations and principals of all 41 of your public schools, is to chunk it into areas. So we have regions 1, 2, and 3. So we have 14 schools in the Eustis, Umatilla area. There's 14 schools. So we're going to have one regional director that oversees those schools and provides direct supports for every one of those principals, does their evaluations in those schools every day, all day. That's what they do. That is their job. Emily's job is to oversee those 3 individuals to make sure that there's some consistency and to support them in that work, to figure out what does this school need. Let me go get that resource or the support, and we're going to push it out to them. So it's going to be a pretty intense process. But one of the things that the Economic Development Group shared with me today is that they're doing the same thing. So they gave me someone from the Economic Development Group to pair with those 3 regional executive directors to match up our business community based on what is it that folks in the South End feel that those kids need, what are the businesses to the South, what are the job skills that those kids need to graduate with, and then we're going to come alongside you and we're going to make sure that we support you with the internships for kids, externships, hiring kids over the summer to work. And so it's an exciting thing as we think about kind of where we are and where we want to be. Because if we look at the back side of this data sheet, you see in a little bit more detail some of the challenges that we face. We were talking about graduation rates. The graduation rates are on the rise here. That's a very positive thing, but we're still below the state average. And I think that this is one of those areas that we can target fast and see a lot of growth in our graduation rates by keeping kids engaged and in school. We've got to figure out what's going to keep them there. So if we look at where we're doing really well, look at economically disadvantaged. Those are our kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch. There's a large population of this district. We're doing really well meeting the needs of those kids. Where are those kids? They're in what we call Title I schools. And what's in those schools? A lot of support. They have a lot of coaches. They have a lot of people who push into those schools, meet with small groups of kids, work one-on-one with kids, and it's making a difference. So how do we as a district make sure that every school, every child has those individual supports, which is why with the regional concept, we have a better, we can focus more on those schools and figure out what it is that they need and make sure that they have the supports that they need. Our ESOL, which are our non-English speaking students, we can see that they're struggling, and that's a growing population here as well. So we're looking at what supports we can provide for that group of students. And then our ESC, those are our exceptional students. And they did show some gains this year, as well as our at-risk group. And those are kids, the at-risk group are kids that come into 9th grade having scored a level 1 or 2 in grade 8 in reading and or math on the state assessment in grade 8. They go into grade 9, they're identified as an at-risk child because their potential, because of their low performing to graduate is lower, so they're considered at-risk. And so we're going to put in some support specifically to identify every child entering grade 9 who's considered at-risk based on the state criteria and make sure that they get on track to graduate. So we're going to put in some positions and supports to work on that. And then you see Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and then our overall math and ELA scores in comparison to the state. I share this with you because I think that there's a lot of great things to build upon here, but I think it also shows that there's some areas that we can focus on and do much better with. So I'm asking you, what can we do? In your opinion, how do we move as a district from the bottom third to the top third? Because there's so much greatness here. We have outstanding teachers. I see it in every school. And I know that there's great potential here. And so I'm asking, how do we as a community come together to support our kids to make sure that they're scoring proficient and that they're showing learning gains to be successful? So I'm asking you, because you know these schools and you know these kids, and I'd love to get your input.
I'm not throwing rocks, and I don't want you to think. I appreciate all y'all do, and I know you all are doing a lot of hard work. But I think sometimes our paradigm is a little bit off-centered. The way we look at school, and my mother and my father, neither one went beyond the 4th grade. But that was in an agricultural region in North Florida back in the 30s, during the Depression. And so as soon as they became about 10 years old, they were able to work. And so they didn't have time to go to school anymore, they had to go to work. And they did. And most kids back in those days did. But what they focused on was reading, writing, and arithmetic. And in their 4 years of school, or 3 years of school, they learned their numbers, and they learned how to multiply, add, subtract, and divide. They knew how to read and write, and the very basics. And they could do that in 3 or 4 years, and then they could go and study on their own. They could go to a library at night, or they could check out books, or they could read and study and learn on their own. That was the theory, and it worked. I think that today we're looking too much at the box, square peg, square hole, and all that kind of stuff. And some kids need different things than others. I just feel like the total immersion, for example, in math. Don't go 30 minutes, 45 minutes of math, and then go to geography for 30 or 40 minutes, and then go to another. By the time you get focused and get into it, you're changing, and everybody's busy being busy. But if they just totally immerse themselves in math for maybe a week or a month, and then go to the next subject and totally immerse in it, I think we got to do something different.
I don't disagree with you. I think we do need to do some things differently. And something that you said is really important, and that is not every child is the same. Not everybody needs the same thing.
Right.
So how do we make sure that they get what they need? And there is no one size fits all. And I think that's where for too long we've said, because you sit in this seat at this grade level, this is what you're going to get, whether you can do it or not.
Some of the older kids can help some of the smaller kids and be a teacher's aid if they're more proficient than the slower ones and smaller groups, I think.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Laura, I'll come back to you at the gentleman back.
One thing Mark brought up a little while ago was about the disruption in classes. I think that what this really comes down to is more of a parenting problem than it is a teacher problem. And I don't know that that's necessarily comes under your bailiwick, but you're sure affected by it. And so maybe some creative thinking needs to be channeled towards that to try to help parents make families that will produce the kind of children that are willing to learn.
So discipline or what?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if the child's not disciplined at home, how's he going to be disciplined?
That's part of the problem.
They should be segregated.
I have been in Lake County for several years, and my kids grew up, and I remember when they first started in the back before maybe the 80s, they started these social experiments in school. And ever since I've been here now, my kids are out of that part of school now. But it's been one fight after another with the school board and the school hierarchy in this county, trying to get them to teach kids, like Norm says, the basics. Get them, I mean, you can see here the students that, like you said, want a car manual, would rather read that because it interests them. Basic stuff, real stuff, instead of social experiments of all kinds that have just kept the school in chaos as far as back as I can remember. And then you add these children that cannot speak English, and that is another thing of, they used to call it mainstreaming. I remember when my daughter was, or they first started mainstreaming kids that had learning difficulties, and they put them in with the rest of the children, and they started making the classrooms chaos. I remember one of those students came up to my daughter, and she got in trouble because the student demanded something from her, and she was eating her lunch, and she said no, and the student, which had a mental problem and all, came and said to, kind of attacked her. It was not exactly an attack. And she just took her plate of spaghetti and turned it up over her head. Well, my daughter got into a lot of trouble over that. But I mean, and now it's where, like Mark says, you can't, there is no discipline. The good kids are at a disadvantage because they don't get the instruction from their teacher, because the teacher is trying to keep the chaos down. And I think the chaos in the classroom is one of the things, and I'd like to say I have a plan to stop it, but it has to be more discipline, and that's a bad word anymore. You can't discipline a child anymore because the parents will have a fit, you will have the ACLU all over it. So I don't know what they're, good luck. We're rooting for you, but
We'll come back to
we had spoke, I had lunch with Ms. Kornegay about a week ago, and we had discussed one of the things that I've seen is that at a local level, you tend to have only so much control of what you can do when it comes to state mandates with our lovely standards. But the one thing that you can do is really look at the current curriculum that we have. I have a second grader, and his curriculum is quite scattered in ELA, English Language Arts, reading. He is to do every Friday a reading comprehension that is 2 pages, front and back, and then a 10-page quiz that is front and back. He's given a paper of about 5 to 6 pages stapled together. And as you can imagine, with an 8-year-old in dexterity, that's quite a bit to do, let alone first read, but then play around with all of those papers back and forth. You have to go back into the text, blah, 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 blah. So I'm fortunate at Eustis Elementary School to have teachers that are willing to listen and work with me. And we played a little game. And we decided that we were going to put the text or the reading passage on one page and the questions on another page. And that way the students could look back and forth without flipping. The 2 classes that did that, every student did do better. And their grade raised the third 9 weeks. So looking at curriculum in this county and seeing what's available through what the state allows us to have available could help our students So I think that when that time comes for ELA curriculum, to have a group of people from around the county, including a developmental psychologist on that team, could help some of our students, because I think you got to start down in the elementary schools because it builds. They have to have those core reading skills to be able to do well on these tests.
She shared those with me, and I have them actually to give to Emily. They're sitting on my desk to show what you, just being proactive and seeing a solution has made a huge difference for the teacher and the kids in that classroom, because they are being more successful just by altering how the passages were laid out and not having to flip pages. And so she did a really nice job. So
Who created that initially? Was it teachers or was it the county curriculum?
It was the county curriculum. It's the county curriculum that they teach. It's been for a few years now.
So as a question to that, does the county have lenience and flexibility as to what curriculums they choose, or is it pretty much guided by the testing?
that's one of the few things that the district does have control over. About local control, we have very little. But we are able to select our own curriculums that we want to, and resources. So the state gives you a list of adopted text, and you can choose from the list, and you have to use a certain percentage of your dollars of things that are on that list. But it doesn't have to go towards a single content area. So we might want to purchase a separate resource for reading, but as long as we meet the required percent off of that list for any content area, then we're okay. And then there's also some requirements that we use digital software type tools as well. So within some parameters, yes, we can choose our curriculum. And typically there is a committee. The state now, the last session with the one prior, does require that a district, before adopting any curriculum, has a community advisory committee and has a lot of input and stakeholder involvement in that selection. So no longer can just people at the district make that selection, but you as a community have an opportunity to review the materials, give input, and be part of those committees, and that is a state requirement that we do that.
Has that happened yet?
This was the
14,
first.
I think it was 2014.
Yeah, and the only thing that's been adopted since then has been CTE resources, and I think it was Spanish. Looking at Emily, since she does that work. So we didn't have a lot of, and of course I was in another county, so I don't know what happened here, but those were the only two things that, because your adoption cycle every 5 years. So those are the only two that came up. We're getting ready to head into science or social studies. Social studies, that is going to be a big one, obviously. So we certainly will be advertising, there'll be public meetings to give input on the curriculum that's being selected for that. So I know this group has a particular interest in that, and we welcome that. Get a few over here. I know you both have been very patient, and I know Mr. Risher as well. Either one.
This is a quickie. As the Federal Department of Education is closed, how do you think that will affect local schools?
It's a good thing.
A real good thing.
I think it's a real good thing.
It's a real good thing. Right. All right, Ms. Lou, we're going to go to Lou, and then two more, and then I'm going to wrap this up if that's okay with you. I think my time limit, I've passed my time limit. Go ahead, Ms. Lou.
Well, with families in so much trouble, and kids from broken homes, and kids in foster care, I have two questions. First of all, at what age or what level of a discipline problem are they tested? And that's one question. And then the other question is, with discipline being such a big issue in lower grades as well as middle and high school grades, are there incentives for kids, rewards for kids who behave well, that would incentivize the kids who are troubled to try to do better, to earn a day to go to a movie, or earn a day with the cops, or earn something that would make them rise to the expectations of the discipline code, change their own behavior, and therefore the whole class would benefit? Are there any incentives in place for these classes?
Every classroom, every school has a variety of incentive programs. So yes to that. I can't tell you specifically, but I know that every teacher has a reward system where they're earning points or tickets or some type of a system that they have in the classroom to encourage kids to behave. A lot of that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that the more engaged kids are, the better they behave. And so we know that if I'm not frustrated and I'm being successful and I'm enjoying being in class, that goes a long way in solving discipline problems, except for those kids that you mentioned that might need additional services. And so once they're identified as having a need, there is a process that the state requires that we go through to document whatever services we've provided to show that we have taken every measure possible to try and correct the misbehavior. When we can't, and it's a 6-month process typically. So it takes a while, but we have to show that we follow the process in order for them to be placed in a program with additional support. So in the meantime, a lot of that can be solved, like I was talking about, pushing additional people into the classrooms. People such as yourself who are willing to go and sit down with a struggling child, pull them out of the group, work on the basics with them, is one of the most powerful things that we can do as a community for anyone who's willing to go in and be a part of a school. I always say is pick one. You'll make a difference for that one child if we can match you up with a child and you just spend the best way to improve a child's reading is to let them read. And often you reading to them and them reading to you and just having conversation, it doesn't cost you anything. And it's the most powerful thing that we can do for our kids. And so I'm going to be campaigning, asking you to come and pick a school, pick a child, and let's do that together. So we'll be talking about that. All right, 2 more. We'll get Mr. Fisher, and then we'll end with you. You're going to. Is that okay? We're going to save the best for last in just a minute.
No pressure on you whatsoever.
Go ahead, Mark.
The biggest things you see here, it comports with my personal observations, is the relatively low level of literacy. And the fact of the matter is, when I ride my bike early in the morning, the number of homes that get newspapers, meaning parents who are actually reading the paper and providing an example for their children, continues to go down and down and down. And notwithstanding the value that digital brings to it, the printed word on printed paper in front of you cannot be replaced. There's a study out there that shows that there's a substantial and measurable difference between digital learning that's less than the traditional printed form of learning as the materials. What we need, among other things, is, and there are a multitude of problems as we've discussed, is how do we partner with a method to get kids to read? Now, when I was in school a century ago, literally. Was it 2 centuries ago? In the 20th century, we used to get the things, in class where it was from a national organization, weekly reader, and other materials like that. But they also had it in middle school, and they were inducing people to read. And to me, you've got a local newspaper that has a need to expand its readership, and trying to partner with them. Mr. Skaggs, I'd sit down with him and say, how can we have 1 page a week on Monday that's dedicated, to 4 different sections that are targeting our, K through 3, the 3 through 6, 6 through 9, and then, 10 through 12 on 1 page that we can use as a tool in our classrooms that week. Somehow work out some type of arrangement with them to increase the value of that, make it available in the schools if it's only just that single page. But to me, you've got to increase the value and make people understand the gold standard for financial, professional success in any trade is literacy. You have to be able to read and you have to be able to communicate. And you learn that and the vocabulary associated with it by reading.
Posted on my Twitter page, which if you're not following me, and we were talking about that at the school, and I posted on there, improving kids' reading by letting them read. Sometimes we spend too much time doing other things. If we would just let kids sit and read, the value of that. And so that's a conversation that Emma and I will be talking about in the schools, because often we have a mandated 90-minute reading block. Some schools have a little bit longer, but the amount of time the kids actually spend reading during that literacy block is minimal.
I'm sure.
So they're doing other things like a worksheet or things that just aren't productive when they would just let them read. But we saw some powerful things in classrooms where you saw two kids just sharing a book that they were reading or sharing an article. We do still have some weekly readers out there, and it's always exciting when we see those. And
What is the average size class today?
Technically.
depending on the grade level, we do have a statute that says
20, 30?
in K through 3, it's 18, and then in 4 through 8, it's 22, and then in the high schools, it's 25. So that's the state requirement for core courses. So your art, music, PE, all those extracurricular courses, they can exceed that, but that's the class size amendment requirement. And there's some flexibility for that. After a certain time period, you may exceed that by 3 kids or 5 kids, but we do have, this district has been good about sticking to the class size with some variance to that, but not a whole lot. All right, last one right here.
How prevalent is dyslexia in the classroom?
I don't know. It's not something we encounter often. I would think that the percentage is pretty low. Maybe some undiagnosed cases. But I don't think that there's a lot, and we don't encounter that a lot. But we do have some students.
Yeah. I have problems when I first grade. I was taught sight reading instead of phonics with my son. And I remember in fifth grade I used to get up and the teacher used to let me read out of the book. Every time I came to a word I didn't recognize, she would say it for me, and then I found one until I found another word that wasn't familiar with it. I suffered from that. And they found out that I had dyslexia. And I'm an avid reader now. And I'll read a book, a history book, she used for this country, or the federalist. I would like to see more action in the school and history classes for the federalists. Because how are you going to love something that we are very shy about? And that would spark a real good interest in some of these young people that say, hey, this guy's telling me the truth. The reason why they're not buying the newspaper anymore, you can't tell the truth from So, in myself, I let the truth be my authority instead of the authority being my truth. And that worked for me pretty good. But I'd like to see more of action done in the classroom with the federal papers because you could talk about that.
Thank you all. This has just been a
Thank
great
you.
conversation.
So you're not going to give us the results of our quiz?
Emily has those. Thank you for reminding me. So what she's been doing is just putting them into groups, because a lot of times we hear the same things, and so she's going to cluster them. So what was the overarching perception? What word did we get?
So words that came up several times were words like poor, and they came up in different variations. Poor in terms of economics, and also poor on the side of management. So we saw that. I saw that in this group that came up a couple times. Just management and leadership was sort of a section that came up. There's a need for transformation, top-heavy, and just the idea that management needs to be looked at in terms of maybe focus. Testing came up as well. 2 words that were interesting that I hope that when we come back and that we get invited back, right? And then in maybe in a year or two, that these 2 words really changed, because these words sort of spoke to me. And one was bland, and the other one was sorry. And so I hope that those 2 words actually, that we have the opportunity, Ms. Kornegay, to change those into something more positive when describing our district. So I'm going to say that's a challenge that's been set for us. So I'm looking forward to that and to changing that perception. Some things that you all felt that maybe we could do is to instill some better learning strategies, and I think that came up in various forms as the conversation unfolded tonight. To instill a love of learning, and I think the idea of finding kids' interest, getting kids engaged in the learning, as we mentioned before. to look at the testing and how much we're doing. And I think we've got to make sure that we have a good understanding of what assessing learning means versus testing, and then the differences between those two. I don't think anybody would argue that we want to always know where our kids are and what the next steps for learning are for them, which is more of an ongoing assessment of students versus end of the year testing piece. And I think I heard some of that tonight. And I love this one, is to find out from students, both who are current and who have graduated, and from teachers, what's working. And I think that you would agree that we are beginning to have lots of conversations that maybe is not the norm in Lake, being the newcomers here. We have found that people have found it very positive when we put people in a room and ask questions about what's happening and what can we do better. Some opportunities for rural schools, which I also think would be the idea of looking at those regional approaches and what is the need of that region and what kind of courses would appeal most to those students and what does the industry want in that region for their students, so that we can create students who want to get back to our county. And yep, I think that was it. So that was kind of the synthesis.
Okay, you did a good job. Thank you for the feedback.